wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life. This is the Sunday Stoic.
Salve! Before we get started, I'd like to thank Martin for emailing in an audio clip for the second part of the introduction this week. I really appreciate everyone who's done that. It's been fun mixing up different introductions. And I'd also like to thank David. David joined Patreon and supports the show at a $5 a month level, which means he gets an extra episode a month. Thank you very much, David. If you'd like to help support the show, go to patreon.com/SundayStoic. On today's show, I want to talk about a theme that we've revisited many times, but it's a core part of Stoicism, that is dealing with mortality. But more important than thinking about death, it's thinking about living, knowing that death is forever around the corner, always a possibility, and using that as the fire to help you to live now. I did an episode sort of like this not too long ago. I told you my uncle had passed away. Well, just the other week, 2 weeks ago now, one of my former students committed suicide, and it's been weighing on my mind a bit, and thought I would, cover this topic again and again. But the Stoics say one of the first things you need to do, if you're going to live well, is to overcome your fear of death, to stop seeing death as an evil. It's not an evil, it's just an inevitable end, and it's something you can't do anything about. But it's once you're there, it's not a state of pain. It's not something that's bad. If you live the best life possible, it still ends the same way. So we're going to hear from Seneca, from Marcus Aurelius, and someone new today, someone I know you've heard of, though. We're going to hear from Socrates. On the Shortness of Life by Seneca, Chapter 3.
Though all the brilliant intellects of the ages were to concentrate upon this one theme, never could they adequately express their wonder at this dense darkness of the human mind. Men do not suffer anyone to seize their estates, and they rush to stones and arms if there is even the slightest dispute of the limit of their lands. Yet they allow others to trespass upon their life. Nay, they themselves even lead in those who will eventually possess it. No one is to be found who is willing to distribute his money. Yet among how many does each one of us distribute his life? In guarding their fortune, men are often close-fisted. Yet, when it comes to the matter of wasting time, in the case of the one thing in which it is right to be miserly, they show themselves most prodigal. And so, I should like to lay hold upon someone from the company of older men and say, I see that you have reached the furthest limit of human life. You are pressing hard upon your 100th year, or even beyond it. Come now, recall your life and make a reckoning. Consider how much of your time was taken up with a moneylender, how much with a mistress, how much with a patron, how much with a client, how much in wrangling with your wife, how much in punishing your slaves, how much in rushing about the city on social duties. Add the diseases which we have caused by our own acts. Add, too, the time that has lain idle and unused. You will see that you have fewer years to your credit than you count. Look back in memory and consider when you ever had a fixed plan, and how few days have passed you as you had intended. And when were you ever at your own disposal? When your face ever wore its natural expression, when your mind was ever unperturbed, what work you have achieved in so long a life, and how many have robbed you of your life when you were not aware of what you were losing? How much was taken up in useless sorrow, in foolish joy, in greedy desire, in the allurements of society? How little of yourself was left to you? You will perceive that you are dying before your season. What then is the reason of this? You live as if you were destined to live forever. No thought of your frailty ever enters your head. Of how much life has already gone by you, take no heed. You squander time as if you drew from a full and abundant supply, though all the time, while that day which you bestow on some person or thing is perhaps your last. You have all the fears of mortals and all the desires of immortals. You will hear many men saying, quote, "After my 50th year I shall retire into leisure. My 60th year shall release me from public duties." End quote. And what guarantee, pray you, have you that your life will last longer? Who will suffer your course to be just as you plan it? Are you not ashamed to reserve for yourself only the remnant of life, and to set apart for wisdom only that time which cannot be devoted to business? How late is it to begin to live just when we must cease to live? What foolish forgetfulness of mortality to postpone wholesome plans to the 50th and 60th year, and to intend to begin life at the point to which few have attained.
The Thoughts of Marcus Aurelius, Book 6, number 22.
I do my duty. Other things trouble me not, for they are either things without life, or things without reason, or things that have rambled and know not the way.
From Plato's Apology.
I have seen men of reputation, when they have been condemned, behaving in the strangest manner. They seem to fancy that they are going to suffer something dreadful if they died, and that they could be immortal if only you allowed them to live.
If you have never read On the Shortness of Life by Seneca, I highly recommend you read it. It's pretty short, and it's a great read. And I just chose chapter 3. I think you can get the whole thing as an audiobook, even on like YouTube, and it's about an hour long. I thought about reading the whole thing and releasing an hour-long reading, but I have an underbite and slur my S's and things, and don't think you need to hear me for a whole hour. But this is the core of today's show, is this reading. Seneca is thinking about the fact that if you looked at all the wise folks of all the ages, and one thing that would probably really boggle their mind is our own blind spot when it comes to our own mortality. Superficially, we all know it's there, but do you really think about the consequences of that? And what Seneca says is we really need to, every day, think of your own mortality as that fire that drives you to accomplish as much as you can. But he doesn't mean accomplish as much as you can just unthinking toil, just doing things mindlessly. Doesn't necessarily mean going to work and doing a great job today. It means thinking about what's really important, what is really important, what will make you a better person, and then working on that. So, is it business that's going to make you a better person? Is it arguing with someone? Is it being drawn this way and that way by the masses? He argues that we surrender so much of our lives to others. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't live a just life and help others, but we often unthinkingly say, oh, sure, I'll be there, and then get engaged in all these social situations. We get engaged at work with all this extra stuff that we don't really have to do, and we use up all this time that we could have spent thinking about how we could improve ourselves and how we could be a better person, a happier person, a more stoic person. We can cultivate virtue. And he argues that, you know, if someone built a house on the edge of our property, we'd instantly kick them off and say, hey, you can't do that. I'm taking you to court. But if someone keeps using up our time, we just often just give it away and don't think about it the same way as we would actual physical property. But time, as he says, is the one thing which it's actually okay to be miserly about. And so what do we have to do to live this way? We have to set a course. We can't just aimlessly wander through life. We have to have an idea of what we're sailing towards. That one way to think about what that means is to picture the Stoic sage, and and picture that as your ultimate goal and shoot for that. Think of what gives your life meaning and make that, your focal point. The thing you steer your ship towards is that goal, rather than just what feels good on a moment to moment basis. One of my favorite parts of this reading today is, first of all, he tells everyone not to put off philosophy until your 50th or 60th year when you're trying to retire, because not everyone lives that long. And why would you leave just the dregs of life just when you're old and you can't do as much? Why would you leave that for the time when you'll try to make yourself a better person? Do it now. And if you've missed it and you are in your 100th year or whatever, that doesn't mean it's too late to start studying philosophy. But if you know about it and know that you want to do it while you can. And then he says what I think is the most powerful line in this reading. You fear everything as mortals, but desire to have everything as gods. So when you're scared of death and dying, or you're scared of losing your money, you think like a mortal. But if you let your evolutionary programming run wild, you desire friends, fame, fortune, and you're willing to give away your time as if you are immortal, not remembering that time is a very finite thing that you have, and you shouldn't just give it away willy-nilly. Socrates, in the Apology by Plato, also mentions that. I just have a short quote from him here where he says, basically what's going on here is he's at he's undergoing a trial. They're threatening to sentence him to death, and he is not kissing the rear ends of the jury like a lot of people would do, like beg them and say, "Oh, you're such wonderful people and I'm so horrible. Please let me live." He's being a little bit arrogant and saying, "Hey, like, why should I kiss your butt?" Like all these other people grovel to you as if you pardoned them, they would live forever and never die. But he knows he's going to die anyway. He's an old man, and if he gets pardoned, he's just going to die in a few years anyway. So, he's not going to stoop down and do something which would be evil, right? From a Stoic perspective, he has control over being truthful or saying falsehoods. He's being truthful, even if it costs him his life. And I like that where he says, people pretend if they were pardoned, that they would live forever. So they're willing to bend to any length, or they're willing to bend to any length. They're willing to go to any length to try to get that extra few years of life. And he doesn't think that is a sign of a strong, virtuous person. And then Marcus Aurelius reminds himself that he knows where his ship is heading. He's not wandering aimlessly like Seneca accuses most of us. He knows what his duty is. He knows what his goals are. And he knows that most of the other things in life that are useless are distractions and don't fit that goal. And so they can be ignored. So we need to keep these things in mind as we go day by day. Start living mindfully, start living actively, and applying our philosophy. I'm trying something that I posted on Facebook. I know this doesn't seem like a huge step, but for a practicing Stoic, but I've been eating beans and rice every day for lunch. I'm not fasting for days on end or anything like that. I'm just doing a simple, sustainable change in my life where I'm eating cheaply, simply, and Musonius Rufus would be happy. It's a vegetarian lunch of simply rice, beans, maybe a little onion, in there, and I try to eat a small portion so that I'm hungry by the time supper comes around. If you read any Socrates, he mentions you need to eat to live rather than live to eat, and he would He would, like many of the Stoics as well, would be very hungry when it came time to eat and would relish whatever simple foods they had. So I'm doing that with lunch, and ultimately I think it would be a good idea maybe once a month or once every couple months to eat something like rice and beans for every meal for a week. You'd want to make sure you're getting enough nutrition as to not hurt yourself, right? But something like that, and then fast for a day every so often to remind yourself of what it would be like to be too poor to eat. That's one thing you can do, to remind yourself, to see how bad it would be. Is it something you could live through? Is it really such a scary thing? But also just to strengthen your will, to walk past that cupboard of sweets and say, no, not today. So something to think about, something I'm doing. Let's remind ourselves that life is not good or evil. It's the place where good and evil things take place. Death is also not an evil. It's an indifferent. And Socrates even said so. Socrates says, well, I'm not going to lie to gain a few years. It's not like I'm immortal if you acquit me. I'm going to die anyway. It might as well be now. Seneca says, start using your time wisely. Start living now. And Marcus Aurelius says, ignore the superfluous things and focus on your duty. And what's your duty as a Stoic? To live virtuously, to be someone that shows great fortitude, to display temperance, justice, and wisdom. Thank you for listening to the Sunday Stoic podcast. You can contact the show at sundaystoic@gmail.com. You can leave a voicemail for the show at 501-503-3132. And keep in touch by following us on Facebook and Twitter. You can support the show by donating on Patreon, www.patreon.com/SundayStoic. You can also help us out by rating us on iTunes or whichever podcast provider you use. Thank you for your support. Carpe diem.